Welcome to our Human Intelligence series. I'm joined today by Marston, and we're here to talk about transformative resilience, or Type R. Is an expert in this, so first up, what is transformative resilience, or Type R?
Thank you so much for having me, first of all. It's a pleasure to be here. It might be worth telling people how my mom, with whom I wrote this book, and I came to these two new concepts, just to give people an idea. So my own background is in strategy and leadership, as well as the big global international issues. And my mom is a veteran psychotherapist, stress expert, and corporate consultant. And each of us were running our own businesses in parallel to one another a few years back, just after the financial crisis, dealing with a number of challenges in our own lives, and started to think about this notion of bouncing back that you hear of so often with resilience. And really, our own experience, as well as looking at the trends of others around us, looking at research across disciplines, was that we don't often bounce back. The world is moving too quickly, but also by the time that we've been through something difficult, whether it's in our personal lives, as a whole business, as a community that's had some big global financial crisis or something like a climate change event, we've changed, and also it would be a waste of adversity to not then make something of it. So in essence, we're talking about transformative resilience, which is using the adversity to grow, to innovate, to create new strengths. And those who do that are what we call Type Rs. And it's probably worth pointing out that these aren't just individual people, they're leaders, they're whole businesses, even communities that are able to do this.
So it's very timely. The accounting profession is going through, I think, probably at the start of a huge amount of change. Technology is enabling us to do many, many more things. But it's also, I think, starting to challenge perhaps many of the norms within the accounting profession. And for example, within management accountancy, we're seeing firms have access to so much more data. We're seeing people's jobs potentially having to change. In terms of perhaps an individual, one of our members, for example, may have been working for 10 or 15 years, it seems to me that being a Type R is something that they should perhaps really think about and grasp.
We would like to think so. We're biased, of course, but we are living amidst more and more turbulence. Again, that can be the disruptions in our own lives of, births, deaths, illnesses that will happen in our life cycle. But there's also so much more that's going on. This year alone, we had the Dow Jones kind of spike and then crash. We're seeing more of that kind of volatility. We've had numerous kind of corporate crises. And then, as you say, there are the bigger change trends of things like how do we deal with the change in workplace, artificial intelligence, mechanization. So there are all of these kinds of disruptions, and it really behooves us to learn the skills of first starting with a Type R mindset so that we are equipped no matter what comes. And the Type R mindset really is this notion that no matter what change or stress comes, that we have the ability to learn something from it and grow. And that's not to minimize some of these events that take place. Some of them are quite painful. We're not trying to be Pollyanna or gloss over that. But if we start with this fundamental belief that we can learn from this and create something positive of it, then that creates almost the infrastructure to then build upon with skill sets and later maybe with analysis, technical solutions, what have you.
So can you unpack Type R a little bit more? You talk about learning, for example, but I'm sure there's a little bit more to it than learning and unlearning and relearning.
Sure. So as I said, Type R really is starting with a mindset and understanding what our default is. It's often difficult to do that in the midst of a crisis or a difficult situation, which is why we often recommend that people look to the past, to different circumstances they found themselves in, and try and remember what their first reaction was. And that's not to say that we can't then stretch ourselves and move beyond that initial reaction, but if we understand, did I ask a question? Did I say to myself, what could I learn from it? Or did I catastrophize and say, oh no, this is going to be the end? That might give us some insight into what our inclinations are, so that we can then reframe and learn to stretch ourselves out of that catastrophic place. And again, this could be an individual or it could be a group of people. But having built that Type R mindset, then you can start to draw on some of the skills, which are everything from adapting, continually learning. One that particularly resonates with people is finding a healthy relationship to control. So balancing what we can control, what we can influence, and what we're going to have no ability to influence over, and therefore maybe spinning our wheels if we keep pushing against it. And a deeper sense of purpose also really anchors us through difficulties and helps us see some deeper meaning when otherwise it could feel like we're just going through pain or discomfort for no reason.
And I suppose also these are things that would be typically good for either those in a leadership position, for example, to draw out, or even those who are perhaps even further up the leadership challenge status in terms of driving the whole organisation forward in terms of their approach, their vision and their culture, and taking forward, because they obviously do have lots of challenges. How do they look to that through that lens?
Well, I think what's interesting about leaders is that using Type R skills and adapting this mindset has an impact on multiple levels. So first, it allows them to be healthy, balanced individuals and to weather all of the different pressures that they face and be effective and healthy in themselves. But then they also influence all those around them. For instance, they help set the culture of the organization and all the practices and communications that follow on from that. So there's the impact within their own organization, which again can happen at multiple levels, but also these leaders then will have an impact in the larger world. Whether it's that a organization like yours has chosen to host somebody talking about the Sustainable Development Goals, which is a concern to all of us, whether or not we're working in it in the most direct ways day to day. So there is this ripple effect in terms of building Type R skills for leaders, first for the quality of life that they have, for their own transformative resilience, then in their organizations and the multiple layers of culture and influencing that takes place there, how it shapes their operations, but then engaging in the big picture issues that affect all of us and that we ultimately have to engage in.
Big picture is a really good point. I think particularly for the accounting profession and management accountants, the whole issue of big data. How do perhaps that's hugely disruptive, but also a huge opportunity, particularly for our members. So perhaps contextualizing that in terms of Type R.
Well, I cannot say that I'm a big data expert, but the notion of data-driven practice has been popular for years. I've seen it in a number of different sectors, and I think data can be an important tool for us to continually learn, asking the right kinds of questions, seeing the answers that we get back from that, trying to figure out, did we ask the right questions? Did we get the responses that we expected? And then creating feedback loops so that we change our behavior based on that. But at the same time, I would say that we overly rely on data and often negate our own instincts and can fall into this trap of gathering huge amounts of information that inundate us, that create stress for the people who work in our organizations, and that doesn't always drive us to better practice if we don't know how to use our own knowledge or emotional intelligence to direct a certain kind of analysis and then application of data. So, like many things, data can be a great tool. It can cause disruption. It can also help us adapt in the face of disruption. But I think a lot of it really is about where we start as people, what our mindsets are, the questions that we're asking, and then the analysis that leads to.
So for our members who might be watching that as an individual, you've highlighted some of those kind of issues and I suppose bigger opportunities and considerations. Is there anything that, as an individual, through your research, through your book, that we could kind of, I would take away, for example, to say, right, well, how do I start to become a type R?
Yeah, and that's a good point, because we do start with ourselves. That's the best point to connect, is thinking about how do we do things differently. As I mentioned, starting with the mindset and understanding some of our own beliefs is a really good starting point. And a lot of that is something that has been shaped over years. So we can ask, what are the stories that I have told myself? Or what were the stories that my family told me about taking risks, or about, when I failed, or when something didn't go as planned? Because those things will very much influence who we are as adults, what we bring to work, our feelings about adversity, about risk, about disruption. There's obviously much more that we can do, but those are good starting points, is to understand who we are, how we were shaped, and our current mindset, so that we can start to make incremental change.
And I guess, you may be sitting there watching this or listening to us and be thinking, but I'm not a type R. But I take it from reading the book that it doesn't mean that you either are a type R or you're not a type R.
Yes.
How do you answer that question?
I love that you brought that up. Thank you for reminding me. I think that in many respects we are all type Rs. So there are these 6 characteristics: adaptability, continual learning, healthy relationship to control, leveraging support, having a sense of purpose, and actively engaging. We're all using some of those skills to some extent in our lives, maybe to varying degrees. We might be better at it in our personal lives than our professional lives. But transformative resilience isn't a have it or not skill set, or the type R skill set. And so we probably already have some elements of that, and we can always build further on that. And I think that's important for people, to encourage them and to kind of say, come along with us. You may already be further along than you know, but also to talk to friends or to colleagues, to emulate things they do that you see is working for them, so that you can grow and stretch yourself. And
I found in reading the book also that was very similar advice in terms of as a leader. A leader can be a very lonely place at times to do that, but I suppose that application in terms of we don't get everything right as leaders, but how would you sort of give a piece of advice to somebody who's in a sort of management position, a leadership position, about reflecting back on being a type R and what they might take away and think about doing?
Well, I think leadership puts people in an interesting position, because traditionally we have thought of leaders as needing to be all-knowing. And that creates really unrealistic expectations, and it can also make it lonely, because people feel they can't share their mistakes as leaders, or they can't draw on the expertise of others to help them along and learn. And so, I guess on one hand, as with any individual, I would say to a leader who is looking to build their type R skills to a greater extent, do the same work, reflect on what has gone well in crises that you've worked on, look to other people that you admire, where have they done things well, and emulate that. find a safe place to build community. You know, that might not always be with the people that you manage. It might be with peers. For instance, a friend of mine is a female senior leader and is somewhat new at it. And so she's learning the ropes and has very kind of cleverly built a group of other female leaders that she gets together with once a month so they can talk about, oh God, that really didn't go well. You know, what have you done when that happens? So I think support, particularly for leaders, is important, but also for leaders to reflect on the fact that not everybody in their organization will have the same experience of events, given, you know, different personality types, different roles, different levels of seniority. And one thing about leadership is that it can blind people, that having some power can blind people to the experience of others at times. So, you know, remembering to surround yourself with people who have different perspectives. And, you know, I hear great stories about very senior leaders who go and kind of sneak onto the floor of, say, a bank and are, you know, kind of hidden so that they can keep some frontline knowledge of what takes place. I think there's some value in that.
Well, I guess we could talk all afternoon. It's a really exciting and insightful topic. We do have the opportunity to leave comments. But Alma, before we end, is there any, perhaps you could just tell us about other resources and other things that you might be able to help if people are interested in this further?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me, and I think we have shared interests, so I hope we'll continue the conversation. Again, my name is Alma Marston. If you look on our website, which will be posted, there's a free Type R assessment, so you can find out where you are in your Type R development. I also have a number of free articles and podcasts that are available if you just look up my name. But you know for all of you out there watching that there's a whole road ahead of you and a number of resources that you can draw on to get yourself started.
Okay, well, Alma, thank you very much for your time, and thanks for joining us on this Human Intelligence series. And we look forward to finding out more as we go into this topic.